Ladies and gentlemen, this is very interesting. The Washington Post today. Russian investigation puts spotlight on Maltese professor. This is an entire article on Joseph Mifsud. It actually helps William Barr. By the way, please excuse a little great white shark bit a nice size hole into this fantastic Marilyn Monroe poster. And I'll go ahead and take care of that soon. But you have a central figure in all of this, Joseph Mifsud. There are a million holes, from deceiving FISA judges to purchasing a dossier, to using a dossier that was linked to Hillary Clinton, funneling money through her law firm to purchase a dossier. This is public knowledge. Then you have CrowdStrike, outsourced by the Democratic Party. Then you have Alexander Downer, who's linked to the Clinton Foundation. Then you have Joseph Mifsud and Natalia Veselnitskaya, two figures supposed to be direct links to Putin. Mifsud is a Maltese professor who has ties to the State Department, ties to Western intelligence. Elizabeth Voss, a brilliant journalist, when she was at Disobedient Media, broke this story before anyone else. Then people started talking about it. Now it's all over the place. It is all over the place. Joseph Mifsud. Okay, so Papadopoulos argues he may have been entrapped. This is The Hill, Congressman Devin Nunes. Joseph Mifsud has ties to the State Department, Washington Examiner. Mifsud described as a Western intelligence asset. Congressman Nunes, Real Clear Politics. Muller report cherry-picked information to portray Mifsud as a Russian agent. He was really a Western agent. It's not that difficult, ladies and gentlemen. It's not that difficult. It's not that difficult to see what's really going on. The Washington Post comes out today with an article saying, Mifsud has ties to Western intelligence, or a lot of people are saying he has ties to Western intelligence, and the article, I could read you the whole thing, but basically it's like he is constantly around Western professors, organizations linked to establishment European academic groups. Then it goes on to kind of say, he's not just linked to, he's also linked to Western intelligence. But that doesn't mean that he's not really a Russian asset as well. So the Washington Post kind of tries to cover its prior grandiose tale. At the end of the day, it does say one thing very interesting. And I'll get to kind of understanding this nonsense. Comey stated, former FBI Director James B. Comey, in an opinion column for the Washington Post in May, described Mifsud bluntly as a Russian agent. He's not a Russian agent. He's not a Russian agent. This Washington Post article actually makes the case that Mifsud has more ties to Western academics and Western intelligence officials and Western governments than he does the Kremlin, which completely undermines the entire Muller report and completely undermines the initial indictment of George Papadopoulos, because George Papadopoulos, the only thing they got him on was an email to Mifsud where they say he lied to the FBI about the date of an email. That's it. Because he contacted Mifsud when he said he didn't. It was an email. He didn't have his phone with him, or he didn't have his calendar, his digital calendar, whatever. Then they tried to get him on obstruction of justice for deleting a Facebook account, for deleting a Facebook account, which his attorneys told him to do. Now you have the Washington Post today walking back a gigantic, enormous propaganda spin, which is that Mifsud was a direct tie to the Kremlin, and he told Papadopoulos about the DNC being infiltrated by Russia, but he never did. And Papadopoulos says he never said that. And the only person who did say that was Alexander Downer. If this isn't confusing enough, it gets even more confusing. What they tried to do was not give the American public a viable, logical, realistic story. They didn't care. They simply didn't care. They didn't care what was given to the country. They just wanted to give something to the country. Now all these holes are being found, and you have a central figure in all of this, the guy who helped start all of this, being exposed as somebody who has closer links to the State Department than he does to the Kremlin. Now, he walked back. Let's see if I can find this. The FBI knew when they interviewed, because Muller did not interview Mifsud, which is interesting. Okay? Muller did not interview Mifsud. Wonder why. But here, this is interesting. After Papadopoulos interviewed, GOP lawmaker questions premise of FBI collusion probe. Mark Meadows. FBI's investigation, quote, certainly was not built on a solid foundation. Okay? The initial probe was predicated upon the belief that Papadopoulos got inside information from a Russian source. But the Russian source never testified in Congress. Joseph Mifsud never testified in Congress. And he also was never asked he was never interviewed by Mueller. This is Chuck Rod. Mifsud was visiting State Department in February of 2017 when he was interviewed by the FBI about Papadopoulos. He also spoke at the same event as Representative Jim Hines. Nunes argues that if Mifsud was a Russian agent, U.S. Intel needs to conduct a damage assessment. So Mifsud is at the State Department. Does this make any sense at all? The Kremlin asset, the Kremlin agent, Joseph Mifsud, is at the State Department in February of 2017. Does that make any sense at all? This is Chuck Ross, Daily Caller. Great journalist. Then you have the Washington Post today, sort of, painting a cloud over this guy, saying, well, Mifsud, he could still be an agent of the Russian government, but we just don't really know. But he does have links to the West. Okay? How many Russian super secret spy agents have overt links? Well, okay, very likely a lot of them. But they're not in the news like Mifsud is. So if you want to be a double agent, if you want to be an agent for a country, sure, it makes sense to kind of put yourself, it does make sense to kind of embed yourself within the places you want to conduct, espionage activities. But you also have to have, there also has to be some proof. There also has to be some evidence that you found a Russian agent. There's zero evidence, and the only evidence is that this guy is linked to the West, and there's no evidence that he had any knowledge of Russian hackers infiltrating the DNC, which we have no clue if it happened because the ODNI report and DHS reports make statements like we're confident, we're not certain, and judgments could be wrong. They have warranty disclaimers. So there's no evidence linking him to the Kremlin, aside from James Comey saying he's a Russian agent. Generally, when you found a spy, you can decipher whether or not the person's been spying on your country or not through evidence, not someone's opinion. Anyway, there's no evidence linking him to any knowledge. And then he walked back his initial statements. So this is John Solomon. What the professor really told the FBI about Trump, Russia, and Papadopoulos. Mifsud states he described the contacts as an academic exercise in the pursuit of peace, not a global plot to hijack the election. And he went out of his way to say there was no talk of sinister cybersecurity intentions, such as the plot to hack Hillary Clinton's emails. So he completely undermines. This is, ladies and gentlemen, what Mifsud really told FBI about Trump, Russia, and Papadopoulos. John Solomon, August 29th, 2018. Mifsud described the context as an academic exercise in the pursuit of peace, not a global plot to hijack the election, and he went out of his way. He told the FBI he went out of his way to say there was no talk of sinister cybersecurity intentions, such as a plot to hack Hillary Clinton's emails. By the way, Clinton's emails, the DNC emails, are not national security. They certainly would not be viewed as national security. If Democrats had won the election, they would have told Trump to take a hike. They would have said, you know what, too bad for you. Next time, use a better password. And that's it. They would not have cared. He said the conversation with Papadopoulos mostly centered about how Trump then campaign team looked to develop a conversation on Europe and UK and with Russia. The guy who is said to have known about the DNC emails and Clinton's emails not only told the FBI before the Muller probe, because he was interviewed before the Muller probe, not only walked back what Alexander Downer stated, but actually completely obliterated the foundation of all of this, was that there's this grandiose effort to conspire against the Democratic Party using Russia, using the Kremlin. And the guy, Mifsud, the professor who is said to have spoken to Papadopoulos and given him all of this information, how do we know? Because Alexander Downer, through gossip and hearsay, notified the FBI. You don't conduct counterintelligence investigations on this nonsense. I mean, the Democrats and liberals and people who believe this must have read a really horrible spy novel right before the election, where gossip and hearsay suddenly is like evidence. Mifsud completely retracts. If one reads the special counsel Robert Mueller's court filings against George Papadopoulos, it's not hard to conclude that the former Trump campaign aide lied to FBI agents to hide some sinister plot with Russia. Now, let me be clear. So he didn't. He didn't. It was an email that he forgot the date of, and they made it like this grandiose thing. When the government or when the FBI or the government or any power structure wants to get you, they are going to try every single possible way. Prosecutors are notorious for never giving an inch, and even when they're proven wrong, continuing to try to ruin people's lives. When Comey, of all people, said, gosh, we couldn't find intent, no reasonable prosecutor would indict Clinton. Are you kidding me? That was a slap in the face of the entire country. The big issue, ladies and gentlemen, has always been, and by the way, Hillary's running again. Yes, she can run. Yes, even if she's under criminal investigation, guess what? She was under criminal investigation, even though it was a cover-up in 2016. You can't find a bigger criminal than both Bubba Bill and Madam Cyberhack, the Golden Moo. She's going to run again. And she eats this for breakfast. Like, she doesn't care about this. All of this, obviously, it's unraveling, but she doesn't care. So whereas we all look at this saying, look, Trump just had an amazing, monumental, historic meeting in North Korea. This is all unraveling. We now know Mifsud walked back all his statements. The Washington Post essentially brings light to all of this in a kind of, halfway effort to kind of still hold on to the prior narrative, but then open question marks that we kind of have already been asking. So the Washington Post actually helps in a major way. The journalists writing did a good job, even though you can kind of tell they had no choice but to just, talk about the truth. But this is very interesting, ladies and gentlemen. Joseph Mifsud's in the Washington Post today. The Washington Post article today says, probably linked to Western intelligence, although there's a possibility he could still be a Kremlin agent. If he's not a Kremlin agent, all of this is completely debunked, which he's not a Kremlin agent. Because there's no evidence linking him. There are no emails, there are no photos, there are no bank records, there's nothing linking him to the Kremlin. There's no evidence linking him to the Kremlin aside from Alexander Downer's statement. And Alexander Downer's linked directly to the Clinton Foundation. And there's more evidence linking him to the State Department. So Clapper and Brennan and Comey and Strzok and McCabe, they're not going to sound the alarms that a Kremlin agent was in the State Department in 2017? Are you kidding me? And then when he's interviewed by the FBI before the Mueller probe, because guess what? The Mueller probe didn't interview him. When he's interviewed, he walks back and completely retracts all the claims that were made by Downer. And there's no evidence that he ever made claims that he spoke to Papadopoulos about the DNC or Clinton's emails anyway. That's another big issue. And then you have the FISA warrants that rely on this conversation, which was now completely debunked, and the Steele dossier. So then how did they not deceive? They got 4 warrants, deceived in all 4. Because the rebuttal was, well, it wasn't just the Steele dossier, it was Alexander Downer. Well, Alexander Downer apparently was lying about the whole thing because Mifsud said he never spoke to Papadopoulos about any alleged hacking. So now what do they have? I mean, this thing's completely unraveled. The Washington Post today, this is unbelievable. The Washington Post inadvertently helped put the nail on the coffin of the Russian hacking myth. Give me your thoughts below. Check out my article in the Jerusalem Post below about AOC's latest nonsense. And if you want to support my voice long term, my Patreon is below in the pinned comment. Thank you very much.